Yeah, so welcome everybody. So glad there's so many people here and from different communities and different kind of specializations, and that's really cool to have so many resources here because you guys are part of how we all are going to learn tonight. So youth mentoring at Helping Services, as Jen said, provides a positive role model for youth between the ages of 6 and 16 in Almaquis, Delaware, Howard, and Winnebago counties. And if you are not from a county that we serve, you can go to iowamentoring.org and check out programs there. And we offer many services to the mentors and to the kids, providing healthy options. And that's kind of why we're here tonight too, is to learn more to help the kids that we serve, but also the kids that you work with and the folks that we all know and are in our communities, to help each other know what is trending out there and what are youth up to. And we know there's lots of positive things that youth are doing, but we really support everybody being here and that idea of learning everything about what we've got going on. So I'll turn it back over to you, Jen, and look forward to what we all learn.
Okay, so moving on to the topic for the night. So tonight we're going to look, of course, this is a subject you can go down so many paths with. There's tons to talk about, but we decided to look at really what's trending and in our area, because it sometimes does look different in a rural community compared to the urban areas, Iowa compared to New York City. So we will be looking at current trends here. We'll take a quick peek at the brain science behind substance use, the signs and symptoms of use. Several of you asked that on your pre-registration, so we included that as well. We'll also be taking a quick look at hidden in plain sight, and that is objects that are everyday objects that can be used for concealing. And then, of course, we leave you with resources because whenever you work in a field like this, we have to have a call to action and resources available to people. And like I said before, please feel free to jump in and ask questions as we go, and I'll make sure I pause for those as well. So let's start you off with a little true false. Marijuana is youth's #1 drug of choice. Throw in the chat box or unmute yourself and just holler out what you think. True or false?
False.
Okay, false. What are we getting, Kathy?
Lots of false in the chat. Yep.
Okay. Let's see. For those who answered false, you are correct. Can anyone tell me what the #1 drug of choice is?
Somebody said coffee. Caffeine, tobacco.
Caffeine could be. Tobacco, okay. What else we got?
Nicotine.
Okay.
Another nicotine. Mass alcohol, caffeine, tobacco, nicotine. Alcohol, another vote.
And those who said alcohol are correct. So with this, I'm going to put a plug in. Alcohol continues to be youth's #1 drug of choice, even though it's not always in the spotlight. Okay. And we'll get to other things like vaping, which we're hearing tons about and is definitely trending. But the overall baseline and #1 drug of choice among youth across Iowa is still alcohol. And there's many reasons for that. Oftentimes youth use alcohol because it has become so normalized within our society, right? They might use it as a stepping stone to exert their independence. Many youth use alcohol or even any substance to escape a stress or a coping skill. Obviously, there's peer pressure wrapped around all of that. Boredom, curiosity, and of course, availability, right? Those are all reasons kids report use of alcohol. So if we look at our latest trend data, I'll put a plug in. The Iowa Youth Survey is a survey that's done across Iowa every 2 years. And we survey our 6th, 8th, and 11th graders. And the prevention field uses this as a baseline, basically. What I want you to know about this data too is it is intended to be trend data because it is given at a moment in time and amongst not every grade level. So when we look at this data, we're often not necessarily looking at the specific percentages, but the trend of it all. The survey was supposed to be done again in 2020, but we all know why that didn't happen. So we're actually waiting for the new data to come out this spring. So that'll help us see even a further trend in this. But taking a look at the counties we serve, Howard, El McKee, Winneshiek, and Delaware, you can kind of get a look at the trend data. And for the most part, it's decreasing, right? And prevention does want to take a little credit for that because of all the hard work we have put into it. We focused on alcohol for a lot of years and worked to reduce youth use. So even though the numbers are declining, of course, we want them to be even lower, right? And when we look at this chart, this is a combination of our 6th, 8th, and 11th graders. So when you put a 6th grader with an 11th grader, the average comes out lower. So if I were to just have 11th graders up here, we'd be looking at the 20% range. But this just gives you a little bit of a look at the trends that happen. And like I said, these are a moment in time and can really vary based on a class size or a class group who's coming through as well. So that's why we do like to look at the trend data. Oops. So when we look at binge drinking, we do look at the same avenue of those who do drink, how many of them have binge drank. And just to clarify that definition, binge drinking, there's several definitions out there, but we use the 4 for women, 5 for men in a setting is considered binge drinking. And of those drinking, oftentimes youth and adults, unfortunately, do engage in binge drinking. Okay, so you can see these trends overall increasing with that. Another major source that we often look at, especially with use, is the perception of harm. So we know that if a youth thinks something isn't dangerous or isn't harmful to themselves, they're more likely to try it. So we often gauge this. And of course, we want this to be 100%, is where we want them to think any substance is 100% harmful. And so of course, we watch this. When we start seeing them respond to a substance that it's not harmful, oftentimes we then see use rates go up, okay? So there's definitely room to improve here because like I said, we want this to be 100%. We want them to know the risk. We want them to know that it is harmful to their bodies. So another trend that we do watch. And of course, with alcohol, we do have to look at society's contribution. Alcohol is so ingrained in our society that it's one of those substances we constantly have to have a pulse on because it's everywhere. It's every gathering you go to, community events, weddings, family birthday parties, the fair, the tailgating before sporting events, whatever it looks like, a majority of the time alcohol is woven into that. So that definitely sends a message to our youth, right? it has become a normal behavior for alcohol to be an element in any gathering. Of course, we have parents who believe it's a rite of passage. They think, I did it when I was a kid, I'm fine. So that often gets passed generation to generation. There's a lack of knowledge, definitely, of the harmful effects and consequences that can go along with use. That prevention is often working on. Of course, it's a legal substance, so it's one more readily available, but also it takes away from some of the urgency of it, since it is a legal substance. And then finally, marketing. I think we all probably know that our marketing industry thrives on getting their next customer. So whatever substance or whatever product that might be. So they definitely market their alcohol to youth, regardless of whether they have prevention programs or they do promote not youth use. Unfortunately, there's also the marketing component. So let's take a quick look at that. So alcohol advertising increases the likelihood that young people will drink. CAMI, it's the Center of Alcohol Marketing and Youth. They keep a pulse and they do research on the marketing practices of business and how they are actually geared towards youth, because youth are their next customers, right? So whether they're putting a role model like a basketball player or any athlete on their logos, obviously making fruity, flavorful drinks can definitely be targeted towards youth. Having store displays get people's attention. You see that, right? And then finally, too, where they put product placement in the store. So many places know that kids like energy drinks. Well, in the bottom right-hand corner of the slide, energy drinks often look like these alcoholic beverages, and sometimes they're placed beside each other in a store. So again, marketing and trying to grab the attention of our youth. So this is something we're constantly battling, and it's a big battle because they have more money than us, is what it comes down to. Okay, any questions on any of that?
There's not anything in the chat, Jen, but I think that what you just said really brings out that idea when people said caffeine is one of the concerns when we think about those energy drinks. There really a lot of youth using those.
And I sometimes think we forget about that too, because we often look at what's illegal for our youth in the prevention world. So keeping a pulse on other substances like caffeine, sometimes do slip off our radar. So I do apologize for that, because I do think it is probably one of the more trendy, I guess, avenues that kids are jumping on, especially if they have like a coffee shop in their community. So looking at these warning signs, you do have to kind of look at this as a collection of warning signs, because any one of these could be just kids growing up, or it could be them going through something. It doesn't always lead back to a substance. So it is knowing a collection of these, or knowing that several of them could be happening. But as you read through these, it's often important for you to understand what's maybe happening behind the scenes too with a child, because a lot of these could be because of things happening at home or things happening at school, but that they also can be substance use. So if you tie a few of these together, that's when your radar should be going off and having conversations with this youth. So we're talking mood changes, starting to have problems in school, rebellion against family rules, friend changes is a big one. If all of a sudden they change to a totally different friend group, that sometimes is a red flag. Taking on the nothing matters attitude, alcohol presence, obviously, if you find something that definitely warrants a conversation, and physical and mental problems like memory lapse, poor concentration, and then some physical signs like bloodshot eyes and that sort of thing. So if you throw a couple of these together, you can see where a pattern could be leading back to a substance. Any other questions?
Jenny, we've got a few comments in the chat. Lisa shares that caffeine and sugar are psychostimulants. Jenny shares mixing caffeine and alcohol can be very dangerous. So isn't that great that we have such wonderful people out there?
Yeah.
Know such great things. Thanks for sharing.
And yeah, to go on the mixing, the energy drink and alcohol, things like Four Loko, which used to be a combination of the caffeine and an alcoholic beverage, have been banned by the FDA because of that, because it intensifies intoxication. It can actually make people intoxicated quicker. And then you basically have a hyper person who's drunk, so we did catch on to that, although of course they've curved that and now say that there's not caffeine in their substance or in their drinks anymore. So always have to be super mindful of products like that. So thank you for bringing that up. Elisa, thanks for the psychostimulant comment as well.
You've got true. More true.
And you are correct. So when you guys hear the commercial next time that says it's just vapor, or you hear someone talking, oh, it's way better than cigarettes, or I'm going to use vaping as a sensation tool, or to help me quit smoking. Basically, they're just exchanging one bad habit for another. So, and when we say it's just water vapor or whatever they think it is, this is what they're getting. Does that look like water vapor to you? And our biggest concern, of course, is the fact that there's nicotine in there. And we know that nicotine is one of the most addictive substances out there. So this is where the misconception happens, or the especially among our youth. They've heard that it's safe to use, and that it's not addictive, and that it's they taste good, with the flavors. And our state has gone, and the FDA has gone to banning some flavors, but of course there's already workarounds happening that allow flavors to be used. But just looking at this slide, it just shows the harmful ingredients that are used within this. Because not are they getting tar, but they're getting maybe the medical particles that are coming off the heated metal that's inside these devices. So definitely a scary substance, and one that we're really needing to get the message to kids, because they're finding out really quickly how addictive these substances are. And I think it starts out pretty innocent, and then pretty soon they're calling Ashley for advice and for resources for counseling. So pretty serious. So
Jen, please, a question in the chat. Sorry, did you want to finish this slide? Go ahead.
Nope, this is just a wrap up. Go ahead.
Okay. A really great question. What's the best way to help youth quit nicotine products? Are there other products that can help with harm reduction?
So, and if Ashley, if you're able to hop off, but so for our 13 to 17-year-olds, we do have what's called My Life, My Quit. That is the youth version of Quitline Iowa. And they help a youth through the process of quitting. There are nicotine replacement therapies. And Ashley, are you able to hop on, or any of my other prevention people, of whether those are safe for teenagers or younger, or fourth graders?
So currently, anybody under the age of 18 through the My Life, My Quit program will not be eligible for NRTs. It simply goes back to nicotine, and nicotine in and of itself can be harmful in the sense of addiction, but it can also cause other issues in brain development. So My Life, My Quit is very, very cautious in that aspect, and they don't give out that kind of stuff. However, I know of one person, their child was, I heard the story through a guidance counselor through the school, and they said that this child was really, really addicted, and he spoke with his doctor, and then through his doctor's care, he was able to get NRTs. And I'm not sure if the harm reduction question is in reference to youth. And if it is, really, we don't have any other measures except for the My Life, My Quit program. But as far as adults, it goes back to NRTs are available, as well as if they utilize a coaching program and go through that, they increase their chances of quitting by double. So.
And I'll just put in a real quick plug for Your Life Iowa is a wonderful resource as well. And there's a chat option on there. And more than likely, the resource that Your Life Iowa is going to refer you to is My Life, My Quit. And Lisa's put that mylifemyquit.com in the chat as a resource for folks to look at as well.
Thank you for doing that. And thank you, Ashley, for jumping in. Did that answer your question, Maddie? Are you good with that? We're finding out that we do need to put way more resources into play, because even Ashley is finding out the My Life, My Quit is for 13 to 17 years. And it doesn't go below 13. So that's definitely a gap in services that we're finding out real quick with the substance. So we definitely need to take a hard look at what we can provide for resources for kids.
And that was helpful to the person that asked.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Ashley. So just looking at this, yes, so we know it's not safe. It contains nicotine, it contains all these extra chemicals. More research is definitely needed. We don't know all the long-term health effects. We're only seeing kind of the immediate effects at this point. And research has already shown that second-hand and third-hand arsenal is also unsafe. So some people will argue that second, it's not smoke. It's so it's safe if you're around someone who's vaping, and that's definitely not the case. So just to give you even just a further dive into what this looks like, so one pack of cigarettes is 20 milligrams of nicotine. So one milligram of nicotine per cigarette. So if you look at if you think about that, and then you jump over to a Juul pod, there's 41 milligrams of nicotine. So if you smoke a pack of cigarettes and you do a Juul, you've then doubled basically the cigarette intake. So you've smoked 41 cigarettes once you consume a whole Juul pod. A puff bar is 50 milligrams, so that's 50 cigarettes, and a CRM pod is 90. So that's 90 cigarettes. So that just kind of gives you a look at the difference between a cigarette and these vaping devices and what the nicotine level is. So our youth are utilizing way more nicotine than if, let's say, they were a smoker. And not that we want them to be that either, but if they go through a dual pod in a day, they just smoke 2 packs of cigarettes. And the thing with vaping is it's more readily available during the day. They're doing it during the school day. They don't have to go and take a smoke break per se. We've had kids report as soon as a teacher turns their back, they can take a puff of their vape. So they're easily going through, more pods per se than if they were needing to go smoke a cigarette. So their nicotine levels are through the roof. And of course, with that comes addiction. And so we have to be super mindful when we're educating the youth too, of this concern that most of them would say they would not smoke a cigarette. So because they've been taught, we've really ingrained that into their minds, but that's them thinking that this form is cool and fun and not dangerous. So we're doing a big push to get that education out to this youth. One of the major consequences that we are seeing right now is what's called the e-cigarette or vaping use associated lung injury. And basically what the research is showing is the lung illness that's caused from e-cigarettes and vaping devices. So we're seeing a higher level associated with this at an earlier stage than, let's say, cigarette use. And that's a concern. And like we said, we don't really know the long-term effects. So if someone continues to use something like this, what that's going to look like for them, right? And so it's kind of uncharted territory. We're kind of learning as we go, but this is some research that's already happened and that we're seeing very scary results from. So do I hear a question? No?
Nope, there aren't any in the chat right now.
Okay.
And people can always unmute too if you have a question.
Yeah, please. So looking at the warning signs, it does come down to knowing your youth. So whether you're a mentor and spending time with them or a parent or knowing what's kind of their normal to looking at these physical signs of vaping can really send up a red flag for you and start that conversation. So you can read through some of these, but really shortness of breath, coughing, chest pain, a vapor's tongue, increased thirst, nosebleed. You can read through all of these. These can all be associated directly with vaping. So, and obviously the more our youth are using these products, the worse some of these are going to get. So just be mindful that if you see a major change in the youth that you're matched with or that you work closely with or a family member or friend, these can all be warning signs for you. Okay, any questions on that? So let's hop over to marijuana use. This is a substance that is very much on the prevention radar, and that we're starting to actually hear from youth more so than our trend data is showing us at this point. That use is definitely going up. And one of those contributing elements is that marijuana can be used in a vape pen. So we've heard that from a couple different youth groups that is trending. So when we look at this trend data, use is way higher than we want it to be. And it tends to ebb and flow across our counties, as you can see. But it's always, I feel like this, again, we're kind of behind on our data because a lot has happened since 2018 that has changed use perspective of things. So when we look at the perception of harm, again, this is looking at if kids know that it's, if they think it's not harmful, they're more likely to try it. And our kids are getting a very mixed message on marijuana. And does anyone want to throw out some answers of why you think that is? Anyone have any thoughts?
Yeah, because they're legalizing it in states around us.
Yeah, so going off what Lisa said, the legalization, the talk about it in our media, using the term medical marijuana, that was a huge mistake from the get-go. We should have never put those two terms together, because that has told our kids, if a doctor can prescribe it, which they don't prescribe, it's another missed element, then it must be safe, right? And so they're super confused, and they're thinking that if it's legalized, well, then it can't be that bad. So they're trying it, right? And the thing that is probably one of our biggest concerns is that it's almost becoming normalized. One element of that is maybe parents thinking back to maybe the 70s or 60s if they're older, or 80s or 90s, when they think, I smoked a little pot, it's fine. Well, we're not talking about the same drug. It's a totally different drug. If this was the drug from the 60s, marijuana wouldn't be in our slides. It wouldn't be the concern that it is. Today's marijuana is so different. The term almost masks what it really is. So when we look at THC levels, so that's the part of the marijuana plant that gets you high. So back in the 60s, your THC level was maybe 4%. In the 80s and 90s, it maybe bumped up a little bit to the 5 or 6 potency level. Today's minimum, if you get just your basic, not been touched, it's in the 10 to 15% baseline. Unfortunately, what we're seeing is other forms of marijuana being used. Edibles, so turning everything into an edible, and in our legalized and recreational states, that's very much a product that's being sold. So your gummies or your everything from water, there's marijuana infused water now. Those levels are getting up into the 50s. And if you look at the slide here, when we're talking about shatter or wax or dabs, we're talking 100% THC level. So when kids are putting a dab into a vape pen, it's a very different drug than what was smoked in the 60s. So we have to get away from that mindset that it's even the same drug, because it's not. And parents do need to be super mindful of changing their attitudes towards that too, because if we have parents saying it's not a harmful substance and you have the media saying it's not a harmful substance, of course kids are going to be more likely to try it, right? And a lot of the time, marijuana is being grown in a lab, and then unfortunately, the scariest part right now is that the Mexican cartel basically is saying marijuana is not good enough, so they're cutting it with fentanyl. And we've all heard that term, fentanyl. One little grain, a salt grain of fentanyl can kill you. So if it's being put into a substance where maybe youth think, oh, it's just pot, I'll smoke a little, or I'll vape a little, or I'll eat this edible, but it's been cut with fentanyl, they're now in big trouble, right? So it's a whole different drug than a lot of people when they hear the word marijuana. They often think of the leafy substance that maybe they used in their history. And unfortunately, it's not that anymore. So any questions on that?
There is a mention in the chat from Maddie. I feel like there's also not a lot of data on how marijuana affects developing brains.
Yeah, I agree. I think we know, Maddie, that that's not good. And obviously it's going to depend on how much somebody uses, how often they use, and what form they're using. So I think they could throw tons of research dollars at this to get us better data, but until our government or our society feels like it's a danger, unfortunately, I doubt that's going to happen. So we'll be behind the times for sure, I think, when it comes to that research. Great thought. Any other questions or comments? So looking,
there's a question in the chat. Sorry, Jen. What is the THC level in medical marijuana?
oh, good question. Okay, so in the state of Iowa, we have what's called medical CBD. We do not have medical marijuana. So that's the first myth we have to get away from. So a marijuana plant is made up of several components. And for the medical purposes, it's the CBD that potentially has health benefits, right? And that's still being researched. And I'm not saying it's not. And if it'll work, then let's make that happen. The thing with the process with medical CBD or medical marijuana in states that have legalized that for recreational use is it's a very expensive process to just extract the CBD. And so when they're going through that process, a little bit of THC usually comes with it. Mm-hmm. And so our medical CBD law in Iowa has changed from percentages to milligrams. But overall, throughout this process, it's supposed to have less than 3% in it, in any product. And so if someone were to misuse their medical CBD, it could become a huge concern. However, people who do have medical CBD cards and use any sort of product, if they were to do a drug test or their drug test could come back positive because there are THC levels in their system. So that's the thing our society hasn't really grasped yet either. So if I am impaired from my medical CBD, that does not exempt me from maybe the accident I caused or something like that. So our medical CBD does have some THC in it. So they claim that if you take it as the bud tenders, not the medical people, if you take it as directed, you should be fine. But everybody reacts different to it as well. So looking at the warning signs, if you feel like you're the youth you're involved in, again, going back to even all the other substances we talked about, but these are kind of the physical signs you can look for: bloodshot eyes, increased appetite, lack of motivation. And you can kind of read through all these. And again, this all depends on how often they might be using or how soon afterwards you see them, the use. So these all can be tied together based on other behaviors or things that you're seeing over kind of a period of time. So it's always good to keep a good pulse on what you feel is their regular behavior or their regular physical demeanor. on this. Okay, so making a jump. Things we keep an eye on. So when you hear what's trending, that could be anything that's in the news, right? So as far as over-the-counter medications or prescription medications that are maybe being taken not as prescribed or taking somebody else's, prevention does keep a pulse on that. Usually our statistics are pretty low for usage, but we do listen to what our youth groups tell us, our youth focus groups. And oftentimes this is happening. It's usually just not a huge trend or a lot of use. So it does sometimes fly under the radar, but we do try to address it if one of our youth groups, let's say, brings it up, or somebody has a conversation that kind of sets off our alarms, because our data doesn't show high use of this. Things like nicotine toothpicks, that was just I think last year maybe, that really hit the news and people started to panic about those. The latest thing is synthetic nicotine. So nicotine that is not made from a tobacco plant. It's actually being made in a lab. We're going to start hearing a lot more about that. So, and things like Kratom. You might drive by a gas station. In most of our service area, I think almost in every county, we can find a gas station that has the big neon sign out in the parking lot that says Kratom sold here. And Kratom is basically a tropical herb that can take the same or show the same effects and have the same effects as an opioid. And so, but it's sold over the counter at your local gas stations or shops or whatever. So we hear about a lot of this, but when we talk to law enforcement or we talk to ER, they're not seeing necessarily the consequences to this type of stuff. We know it's not safe, and we know we also have to kind of keep an eye on it. But these things hit the news and they hit the media, and it looks like it's a huge trend. But the kids we've talked to, it hasn't trickled down to them yet. And not saying that one or two maybe haven't tried it or something like that, but it's not one of those trends that is making data level change. So, and I think we definitely need to add caffeine to this one as well. So, any questions on that? Or any of my colleagues who a lot of my colleagues have specifics on this slide. Okay, true or false? Our brains can tell the difference between a street drug and a prescribed medication. What you got?
We got false, 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 false. Lots of falses.
Excellent. You guys are so smart. Good job. So you're right. Our brain doesn't know whether it's Oxycontin or heroin. All our brain knows is that this substance has activated our reward system, and it releases dopamine. And when our body releases dopamine for whatever pleasure it is having at that moment, whether it's a chocolate chip cookie that's been microwaved for 8 seconds, or it's heroin, it says, this feels good. Let's keep doing it. Okay. And it doesn't know what label we've put on anything in our society, right? So what we know is that a prescribed opioid has similar chemistry and produces the same effects as heroin. And so we have to be super mindful of this and in knowing this process, because oftentimes that substance then hijacks that reward system and in turn leads to addiction. So just to give you a little bit of history, how our mind works, and putting that education out there that oftentimes people say, oh, just quit. Why don't you just quit? Oftentimes people can't because their brain has experienced this sensation over, sometimes it's one time, but over time, and it likes it, so it doesn't want to quit. And in turn, for it to quit, it has to go through withdrawal. And our bodies do not want to go through that. So this just gives you a quick little history of how our brain works with substances. And what we're learning now is that our brain doesn't actually need a substance before dopamine is now being released. So we've all probably heard the word trigger. Our brain, we're finding research is showing us now that our brain can be triggered based off of something leading up to that substance use, and it releases dopamine. And that puts another barrier in front of the person who maybe is in recovery or who is attempting to stop. And that could be the people that they've maybe used with in the past, or a house, or something that triggers their body to remember the situation. And so we're learning so much more about our brain and how substances affect it. And hopefully in turn that can help with us treating people and getting them the recovery services that they need. So any brain questions? I just wanted to, I like to throw this plug in here because there's always that misconception that people should just quit whatever substance they're using. And if it was that simple, a majority of them would. Okay, so how do we know if our teen or a young adult in our life has a substance use disorder? So like we've talked about amongst the other just specific drugs, it usually is a combination of things that you maybe are seeing. So not any one thing has to be an alarm, but it can just be put on your radar, right? So the change in a peer group, that's usually huge. If all of a sudden they stop doing their normal activities, or they go from being a good student to skipping school, things like that are really out of their personality behavior, or what you would consider to be their normal behavior. And we know that our youth are faced with so many things in their life that oftentimes they do turn to a substance in order to cope or to deal with a trauma or the pressures that they're feeling. So we have to be really engaged. If you have youth in your life, that's our big takeaway, is get engaged, have conversations, so that when something on this list maybe happens, you have a good pulse of how things are going already. Okay, any questions on that part? That was just an overall, it kind of applies for every substance regardless, right? Or any other substance trauma, change in their life that might be happening. So let's take a real quick look at hidden in plain sight. So another wonderful marketing ploy that happens in our world is stash devices, basically, is what you're looking at here. So almost everything that's a commonplace item now can be modified to be a stash container. So for those of you who haven't gone through one of our hidden in plain sight teen bedrooms, we invite you anytime you see one of those events to come and check it out. We set up a mock teen bedroom, and it's filled with drug paraphernalia or drug related things, or just stash devices. And we invite parents or caregivers to go through and see what they can discover. And usually law enforcement is there to help guide them through that process, and then basically tell them everything they missed is what it comes down to. So these are things that are not illegal. They can be sold everywhere. Spencer's is the biggest place that you can get any of this stuff. Tons of online opportunities, and nothing that they're doing is illegal, because they will say, oh, that is for, so like take the hairbrush. Well, that's a stash container for your money. Or even like Yeti Coolers has stash containers, but it's for if you're canoeing, this is where you can put your jewelry so you don't lose it in the water. Or, but a lot of the items are intended for hiding drugs, is what it comes down to. So backpacks, hats, clothing, all have stash compartments so that parents or law enforcement can't find them. This next one is specific to vaping. The girl at the top, that's in her sweatshirt. That's just the string of her sweatshirt. And that's a vape, and they've installed a vaping device on it. The Sharpie, the Juul that you plug into your computer to charge, that looks like the USB port. So again, the marketing world is always a step ahead of us on what these devices can look like. They're always coming out with new marketing materials. So just wanted to give you a quick look at that and put a plug in for our hidden in plain sight events. So what can you guys do? So if you have a mentee or any youth in your life, your own child or a niece or a nephew, or kids you work with, like I mentioned before, staying involved is really your best ticket. Knowing what their regular activities are, who maybe their regular friends are. If you're parents and you're able to check online activity, talking to the friends' parents, and keeping just that close-knit group, and using each other as resources can be super helpful. We always tell our mentors to find teachable moments. Anytime you can have a teachable moment, have it, because the more our youth hear things from adults that care about them, the more likely they are to listen. And we know that kids, they respect having that older person, that responsible person in their lives. Going for a walk or driving or playing a card game like my after school match in the photo. They might be playing cards, but Lexi is asking Chase, how was his day? How was his friends? Just all questions that aren't intimidating, but hopefully will allow them to open up. They say the less eye contact that you have, if you're having a moment, is better. So going for a drive, they might be more apt to open up to you. Approaching with openness. So youth are going to turn to us if they know we're not going to judge, and if they know we're not going to scold them, and just listen. Sometimes they just need us to listen. And not always can we solve maybe what's happening, but we can be a shoulder to cry on. We can be a good listening ear and help them work through it, and just be a support. Offering that empathy and support is huge. So recognizing their feelings, acknowledging their feelings, telling them, I'm sorry this happened to you, or I'm sorry you're going through this. What can I do to help? Are all great supportive questions that you can ask. And sometimes they just want to maybe step away from what's happening in life and just enjoy their time with their mentor. And that's okay too. They don't always have to talk about everything. So does anyone else have any great things that have worked or that you've tried that you can share with the rest of the group as ways to have these conversations with your mentee or youth in your life?
I can share a little something. I feel like another underlying reason for like kids or really anyone using substances as coping mechanisms is like previous trauma that they may not be fully understanding. And so obviously if you're a mentor, that's not necessarily on you to help them unpack their trauma, but like you can encourage them and model for them to like address that and seek professional help or find what would be considered healthier coping mechanisms to like cope with things and stuff like that.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Maddie. I think that's one of the things with mentors or just adults that you turn to is giving them the skills to handle or to be able to know how to answer, I guess, like you kind of said, like if a youth discloses something or is just having a hard time, maybe, yeah, like our mentors and they kind of have to have the tools in their tool belt to handle that too. And really what it does come down to is being a listening ear and then knowing how to refer to the professionals or giving them, maybe they have experience or maybe they can walk them through that those problem solving steps. So really great point. Thank you for sharing that. Anybody else have anything that's really worked?
This is Cindy, and I think I'm thinking of my first mentee that, you know, as she got a little bit older, we'd go out and I'd use pondering questions, or she'd bring up something regarding an incident at school or something with her friend, and we would talk about it. And it was kind of great to hear from, you know, a youth standpoint. And mine was very, very astute and very smart and really logically thought things out. And I'd throw some questions back to her. But I'd also commend her for opening up to me and letting her know that I was there to continue to listen to her. So that's what I've used as a mentor.
I think that's huge for you to say thanks for sharing that with me. I think that goes a long way with our kids too. That's awesome. Anybody else have anything? I think it's important for us to be mindful of trying not to solve all their problems for them and helping them walk through solving it for themselves so kids can build up their resiliency and work on their own coping so that when they're by themselves or in a moment that they do build on that skill set to process things. So I think being a part of that process when you can is a good skill to teach them too. Okay, for sake of time, I know we're over, sorry. These are resources. Like Kathy mentioned, Your Life Iowa is now our go-to hub for basically anything in Iowa. And from there, after you've chatted or text or talked on the phone with a counselor, they then will refer you to whichever avenue you might need. Okay, so whether that's your local entity, whether it's My Life, My Quit, or keeping you there. But also in that moment, they might say you need to take this child to a crisis unit. Or, but they're the experts, and that's the perk of this hotline. Is it can be for substances, it can be for suicide, mental health, problem gambling. It's the whole gamut. So we don't have to keep remembering, what hotline do I call for tobacco? What hotline do I call for suicide prevention? You know, Your Life Iowa, and it's right there. So, and it gives the options of talking to someone on the phone. Most of our youth don't want to do that. So they want to be able to text or chat with them, you know, on the computer, which I think is huge that we have that available for them. The My Life, My Quit is like Ashley and I mentioned, and Lisa brought this up too. So this is for our 13 to 17-year-olds. The people on the other end of that are trained for this age group. So that is super important to have that component. And then our local treatment and mental health agencies. So down in Delaware County, Substance Abuse Services Center, or SASE, is our local group. And then up in our northern counties, Northeast Iowa Behavioral Health are places that can provide those services. So just wanted to give you those resources as well. I think we maybe did a plug for this, but we actually go out and do Your Life Iowa presentations as well, because we do want to get this resource out to as many people as possible. So if you or anyone, any group you're involved in, church group or fire department, EMS, anyone that we can come out and give our little spiel to, we're happy to do that. Kathy and I can come out and do that for you. It can be virtual too. So just give us a call. We're happy to do that. And yeah, questions.
And one thing I'll just say is we did have a very lively discussion about marijuana. In April, we will be doing a training with some of the Luther College students that are on the call tonight, that we will be presenting about the pros and cons of legalizing marijuana. And so looking at lessons learned from that process and everything. So we'll get you information about that as well. But really encourage you to complete your evaluation. And I can put that information in the chat here if you're not seeing that.
Thank you everyone for joining us. We appreciate it. And we do appreciate your feedback on the eval as well. We always like to make our presentations better. So any input would be fabulous.
Thanks, everybody.